That's a good question. And the thing is that for us, it all depends on the intent, obviously, of the technique. Now, when you look, typically what you'll do is when you separate the hands here, the right arm deflects and the left arm strikes. So this is where his fist is, this is where his head is. So what you'll try to do is strike in that direction. That's going to determine where exactly that you look. It doesn't make sense for me if my attacker is over there and his fist is over there to look at his fist while he's standing right there. He's got another arm, so he's going to come at me with the other one. I need to be looking at the target, which is commonality in pretty much all the techniques. As much as possible, you focus on the attacker as opposed to just do it, looking anywhere and at any time, at any point, regardless of the context. This is why when we practice the form, you're supposed to focus in a specific direction, straight or to the corner, as I explained, but also you're looking generally in the direction the technique is going. In this case, it's not the fact that I'm going straight forward with my upper body, and as I separate the hands, that is going to determine the technique itself and the intent. No, because the application, it has different footwork than the way you do it in the form, as is often the case, is that the form is different from the application. Application comes first, form flows out of that. So if he's standing over there and I deflect, I'm going to strike over there. The other aspect is that the technique looks very similar. And when you look at just the form, it looks exactly the same technique. The only main difference is that now his head is over there, his fist is over there. So it's the opposite side. We're coming up from underneath that striking arm and hitting him in the throat. Now, this is not an uncommon technique. You see this in different styles as well, other arts. For instance, in Filipino martial arts, you see it where they will deflect and do some sort of upward strike or an uppercut type movement, whether it is armed or unarmed. And this is a similar technique. It's not really an uppercut strike, but it's more an outward strike, hitting with the bony part of your hand or forearm or wrist and hitting into the throat, which means that I have to look where he's standing. Is right there. The attack is right there. Again, footwork is adapted in the application. The form we do it one way, the application is different. The form is not meant to be on a one-to-one comparison with applications. Never the goal. Sometimes when you look at how we do technique in the form, is very, very similar, to the point of almost being identical. The point of the application is that you need to be able to adapt to circumstances. So you need to have a skill set with a given technique, as opposed to like, no, this is how we do it in the form, so this is how we do it in self-defense. It's not going to work. And I understand the question, but it's not going to work. So I'm going to look where he's at now. If I am standing like this, okay, and I would have if the guy is facing me and I get to the outside and I come up underneath, I'm going to be looking here. It would make zero sense for me from this position to twist my head and turn it up and rotate to the right to get a better look at him, because it's going to block my neck, the rotation. You don't have enough the ability to rotate your neck easily that way, and it's going to make my upper body want to rotate away from him. Whereas that's not the goal. My shoulder should be moving forward as I do the movement. So that is a different requirement. So, and that is why when you compare the two movements in the form to the actual application, they look similar. They look identical. They are not. They are completely different. But you need to know the application to understand that. This is one of the ways in which, when I see students practice the form, it is immediately clear if they understand what they're doing or not. If they're just going through the motions, or if they have the yi, the martial intent of actually striking where they need to strike, whether it's to the right or to the left. And that is immediately visible just with the way that the gaze is pointed and the way they hold their head and so on. The form is filled with these kind of things. where it is very clear those who practice the applications and those who don't. And again, and you asked this, and we talked about this last time, one of the previous times as well, is that there is nothing wrong with practicing Tai Chi just for health and because you enjoy it. It's perfectly fine. My position is and has always been that you get the best health benefits from also practicing the self-defense aspect and practicing it as a martial art as it was, or usually was, especially in the past, that's always how it was practiced. You get the best health benefits and you get the self-defense benefits, and these two reinforce each other. You've got the 5 classical components of Tai Chi Chuan that we've already discussed, and they all reinforce each other. They're catalysts for each other. They're not just 1 + 1 + 1 and so on is 5. It creates a multiplication of the effects that you get from practicing them all together as opposed to separate individual building blocks. You're supposed to interact with them all. And again, if you don't want to do that, that's fine. It's just not what we do. We have a more traditional approach, and I think, and then it's not just me that thinks this. It's just the evidence is clear, as far as I can tell, that is a much more effective approach. Whether you want to do it for health, relaxation, self-defense, physical conditioning, whatever, all these aspects are automatically covered if you train correctly. That's a caveat. Correctly in the more traditional way, as opposed to the more modern way of just doing just doing the forms or maybe push hands just as an exercise. Again, nothing wrong with that, but I think it's maybe better than you just view it as exercise, as opposed to, well, I'm also learning self-defense. No, you're not, unless you practice it. Unless you practice somebody attacking you and defending with your techniques, it's not going to magically appear, that self-defense skill. It's just not how it works. So in that regard, I hope that answers your question. But in that regard, I think the critical element, and I've talked about this in one of the first videos that you see in the online course, is path to progress, is in which I specifically delineate different steps that you need to follow to get to that point. You don't get there by jumping forward in the way that you make progress. This is one of the things that we've discussed many times in the past as well, in the previous live training sessions that we did, and I've written about this as well, if you remember, is that our late head instructor, Dan Doherty, a lot of people tried to copy the way that he moved after 30 years of practice without going through the same process. And again, there's nothing wrong with that per se. It's just that it's unrealistic to expect that you get the same results while following a completely different trajectory than that person. I mean, you know a lot of the stuff that Dan did, how hard he trained, and so on. And there's many people who experienced it when he was teaching seminars and so on. In my first seminar with him was a long time ago, decades ago. I had just learned single whip in the short form. So I was just a beginner. I'd been training for maybe 3-4 weeks, and Dan showed me cloud hands. That was so really early on in my training. And then we did rolling thunder hand for, I think, 20 minutes straight. And he was just punching. And I was in really good shape back then. And I was having a hard time because of the specific conditioning. I hadn't done that before because I was only training for a few weeks. And again, this is a basic principle in sports science specificity, is that you train specifically for whatever physical activity that you have to do in that sport. Same applies here. If you don't train a particular way, you can't really expect to get the same results as somebody who does. So if you want to be as good as Dan was, I don't know if that's possible for us mere mortals, but you can try to train hard and that, I think that answers your question, with the proper intent behind each movement, behind each technique. One of the things that he often said during seminars and when correcting students, when they asked him a question, he would say "chung yong," not too much, not too little. It's a more complex. How should I say? It's a more complex concept than the way we would translate it into the golden mean. Is a way to understand it. It's not the same thing, but it's similar enough so that, you know, students get it when you say that. It's just the middle of the road in the sense of not too much to the left, not too much to the right, stay in the middle of the road so you don't crash into the side, into the bushes on the side, or you fall into the river or whatever that is next to the road. And if the road turns left and right, goes up and down, you adjust accordingly. Not too much, not too little. Well, when you would see Dan do the form, he do the brush knee, twist step, and then follow up, and it was always just right. There was nothing lacking. There was nothing overly done. There was nothing superfluous. Everything was right there, just enough as it should be. Not too much, not too little. He didn't get there by accident. He trained really, really hard. One time I asked him, so it was about rolling thunder hand. So how long should we do that? I mean, what? Because I was looking for more information. Okay, this is new to me. So how do we train this? How long should you train? He said, you know, well, there's not really a time limit, but one time we did it for 90 minutes straight. Are you willing to do that? Not everybody is, and that's fine. You don't have to. But then don't necessarily expect the same results. I'm not saying that's the best way or the only way to train rolling thunder hand. I'm saying that he was willing to do that. And a lot of people are not, but they still want to have the same results as he had. I don't think that's realistic. So anyway, back to your question. The intent needs to be there. And the intent is, like we said, it's expressed in the eyes in many cases, but not just the eyes. The entire movement needs to be coherent with the intent of the technique. Now that can change as we have different variations of techniques, and depending on the variation that you want to emphasize as you do the form at that specific point, you can bring a lot more nuance in your movement to point towards specific techniques that you are then practicing at that point in time, different self-defense applications. The best example that I can think of is brush knee twist step. Step back to repulse the monkey. Is the way that we pick up the foot. So how will we do that, and how will we then put it down? Let's look at a few variations, and I think that's going to be a better answer. Is that okay?